Welcome to Crossroads. The U.S. Navy has a plan to prepare for a possible war with China within the next 3 years. That's 2027. Now, this new strategy, called the Navigation Plan for America's Warfighting Navy, aims for, quote, readiness for the possibility of war with the People's Republic of China by 2027 and enhancing the Navy's long-term advantage by making the Navy, quote, more ready for sustained combat. In other words, not just a quick little battle, but an ongoing combat situation, a war. As well as, quote, prioritizing the People's Republic of China as the pacing challenge. You might remember previous reports we talked about the United States is shifting its kind of focus and the main challenger to the United States from Russia to China, including notably on the nuclear stage. They're now deeming the Chinese Communist Party as a greater nuclear threat than Russia, something we haven't done before. Now, according to this NAV plan, CCP leader Xi Jinping has told his forces to be ready for war by 2027. But the United States Navy will be, quote, more ready. Now, this would be achieved through the implementation of what they're referring to as Project 33, which focuses on preparing the U.S. Navy for that potential conflict again with the Chinese Communist Party at least by 2027. Now, while at the same time also enhancing the Navy's long-term advantages, and of course when it comes to combating the CCP's Navy, the biggest, though unspoken point there, is obviously the Chinese Communist Party's potential invasion of Taiwan. Remember, one of the big things on the Chinese Communist Party's plate, the big red line they've drawn in the sand, the thing they say is one of their top priorities, is the quote-unquote reunification with Taiwan. In other words, taking Taiwan by force. The United States has stood by its plan to at least support Taiwan. They won't directly say defend Taiwan. But were that to happen, a lot of that would be a naval battle. The Chinese Communist Party have to cross the Taiwan Strait, very shallow waters. You would have a very intense war between, again, Taiwan and the Chinese Communist Party. Other countries, Japan especially, might get involved in that because it's right in the neighborhood. And they, of course, have been working more closely with Taiwan as well. And the United States has its what they call hellscape plan of using various unmanned vehicles to basically delay the Chinese invasion while that gives time for the U.S. Navy to respond to it. The issue the U.S. Navy is having right now, though, is that part of the whole design of the U.S. military, going back pretty far, is we're, America, geopolitically, or geographically, we're kind of a bastion country. We're very hard to invade. And if you want to invade us, well, we'd have two different armies, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. And the focus of the United States with warfighting is to have an army and a full military on both sides fully capable of defeating one adversary. The problem we have now, the Chinese Communist Party wants to get the United States involved in wars with multiple adversaries, at least 4, and they've already gotten those going. They have a terror war, they have the Russian war, they would have probably their war, and they're trying to now stir up conflicts in South America, they're trying to stir up other conflicts elsewhere. Now, were that to happen, of course, the Chinese Communist Party would then have a divided U.S. military. And that division, they believe at least, would mean that they'd be fighting more of a partial U.S. force, not the entire brunt of it. And they believe that that's their opening. Now, that's what this new NAV plan comes into play, and what the U.S. Navy is preparing for that potential scenario. Because remember, it's not just about fighting wars. It's also about having proper defenses in place in case another country, like maybe Russia, for example, partnered again with the Chinese Communist Party, would decide to maybe attack or invade or do something else while the U.S. military is distracted in another place. Now, the U.S. Navy NAV Plan 2024 says this. It says this navigation plan drives forward 2 strategic ends. Readiness for the possibility of war with the People's Republic of China by 2027, and enhancing this whole system as well. Now, it says that we will work towards these ends through 2 mutually reinforcing ways: implementing Project 33 and expanding the Navy's contribution to the joint warfighting ecosystem. Now, this is an important part of what makes the U.S. military unique. The U.S. military has many different branches. Also, we have state militaries, the National Guards. And part of the power of the U.S. military is this kind of integrated system, the joint warfighting ecosystem. A small group of troops on the ground, supported by ships, supported by intelligence, supported by reconnaissance, supported by air, again, air support, and all these things working together to make what is otherwise a very small footprint backed with the full brunt of very powerful military. Now, it notes that this ecosystem is a layered network of interconnected systems with shared dependencies. Those who cooperate in the ecosystem create compounding, outsized effects over those who do not. It says the warfighting ecosystem operates much the same. A system in which the layered capabilities of each of our military services enabled and are enabled by each other. For example, for one of the big things with modern fighter jets, the fifth generation jets the U.S. is rolling out, they don't just work as maybe things focused on air-to-air combat. They have systems to basically suck up massive amounts of data. They also work hand in hand with, for example, submarines. And again, this system of sensors working together with other, military assets makes it so that it's an integrated system. You're fighting one thing on the surface, but behind that thing, connected to it, is a much larger, much more powerful force. Now, they note the chairman of the People's Republic of China has told his forces, that's Xi Jinping, to be ready for war by 2027. And this navplan says, we will be more ready. And it's a challenge posed by the PRC, People's Republic of China, to our Navy, now goes well beyond just the size of the PLA Navy fleet. It's the People's Liberation Army. It says ships matter greatly, but gone are the days when we assessed threats based purely on the number of battle force ships on tonnage. Through operational concepts like multi-domain precision warfare, gray zone warfare, and interestingly to say, economic campaigns, expansion of dual-use infrastructure, for example, airfields, and also dual-use forces like Chinese maritime militia, and a growing nuclear arsenal. The PRC, the Chinese military, represents a complex, multi-domain, multi-axis threat. Now, given this situation, the strategy seems to address concerns about whether the U.S. military is prepared for a war with the Chinese Communist Party. Now remember, this is in context of a recent congressional report. That report alleged that if a war were to take place right now between the United States and China, it at least assessed that the United States would risk losing. In fact, it said it would lose. The main issues that it raised are the facts that, well, it would see the United States at war with not just the Chinese Communist Party. Were we to go to war with China tomorrow, we would not just be fighting China. We'd be fighting a terrorism war, maybe North Korea, maybe Russia, maybe other forces in Venezuela, and other countries would use that opening to, again, expand their conflicts. Remember, of course, the U.S. government is not recognizing Maduro now as a legitimate leader in Venezuela. They're recognizing the opposition leader. If a war were to take place, the United States would be pulled into multiple fronts. The strategy the Chinese Communist Party wanted in place. And also, there's a lot of other issues. The report also noted that the United States does not have a domestic supply chain and manufacturing base that would be able to function properly, at least not for the long term, were it to get cut off from the parts of the world that we need to be able to manufacture ammunition and build new tanks and bombs and guns and everything else. But notably, it appears the United States is working to close all of those loopholes. For example, with the problem of fighting a multiple front war, the United States right now is working very hard to develop allied nations that would be able to stand alongside the United States against the Chinese Communist Party and its forming axis of nations. Meaning, again, if the United States went to war, it would mean that it would have its allies, the CCP would have its allies, and this would be the battle, not just the U.S. fighting this alone. And the United States also, interestingly, is working on new supply chain programs under one of the big narratives of de-risking from China. For example, with rare earth minerals and rare earth materials. We're no longer wanting to be just reliant on the Chinese Communist Party. And, interestingly, the Chinese Communist Party on its side is kind of accelerating that because every time they sanction the U.S. or put restrictions on some of these materials, well, it's not like with chips where, the CCP can't manufacture them. They're not capable of it. We can just go open mines. We can work with other countries and develop actual, profitable businesses in other countries. The benefit is there in doing it. The only reason they're not doing it isn't because they're not capable of it. It's just because, it costs money to do it. And until now, China has been the cheapest source of these materials. There's other options out there. It's not like we need them for it. And so because of this trade war, it's causing the U.S., and not even just the U.S., but Japan and Australia and other countries, to begin establishing alternative sources for all of this, breaking the CCP's monopoly in the process. Now, it appears also the United States and its allies are becoming much more alert to the growing threats of the Chinese Communist Party overall. The U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, just declared during a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing that the threat from the Chinese Communist Party is greater than the threats of the Cold War. Watch.
I think there is a recognition that this is the most significant challenge in our history. Frankly, the Cold War pales in comparison to the multifaceted challenges that China presents. It's not just a military challenge, it's across the board. It is in the global south, it is in technology.
Now look, that's a pretty major statement. I grew up at the tail end of the Cold War, and I remember, of course, the nuclear threats and people talking about it, and it scared the daylights out of me. Anybody who lived during that time remembers that there was a very real threat of nuclear war. The Cold War saw global proxy wars, we saw revolutions, networks of subversion, and again, the threat of just, nuclear decimation. It was very serious. The threat at that time was serious. And so to declare the Chinese Communist Party and the threat they pose as being greater than that, that's a major statement. And interestingly, on another note, the Deputy Secretary of State also warned of the intensity of the ties between China and Russia.
What we are seeing between China and Russia has the potential to destabilize Europe over the medium term and long term. And we have to be resolute about this. And I will say this is a relationship, guys, China and Russia, that we, the United States, has always had problems with. And frankly, I think we have been slow to recognize the absolute intensity of engagement between President Putin and President Xi.
Now, this is important because, for Europe, Russia is probably the biggest concern they have. This is a war in their backyard, and as again they begin backing up Ukraine in that war, because again the war is affecting their energy sources, it's affecting the economies there. As they back Ukraine in that war, Russia is threatening many of these countries, Germany, for example, the UK, for example, with nuclear retaliation. Now, given that as well, NATO has determined that the Chinese Communist Party is one of the key enablers of that war. If the CCP enabling it were to be cut off, that war would probably come to an end. At the same time as well, not too far from that region either, you also have Iran now threatening war against Israel. You have Israel expanding its war into some nearby countries, and that's causing, again, a global terror war, resurging a lot of these terror networks, which have roots, again, not just now in the Middle East, but even in parts of Europe and even possibly throughout Latin America and in the United States, especially if again, Hezbollah is dragged into this. Given this situation, this war, this conflict is in everybody's kind of backyard now. This is not something distant anymore. And again, on the U.S. side, they're noting the hand the Chinese Communist Party is playing, stoking all of these flames. Something we've talked about before any of this happened, noting that this was going to be the Chinese Communist Party's strategy. Now, part of the U.S. response to this is to establish new missile defense systems in the Asia-Pacific region. And a big focal point of this has actually been in the Philippines. I'll be talking about this more after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. It appears the United States and its allies are becoming a lot more aware of the threats of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the U.S. Navy's 2024 Navigation Plan for America's Warfighting Navy aims for, quote, readiness for the possibility of war with the People's Republic of China by 2027.
I mean, the 2027 timeframe really comes from Chairman Xi's own words that he has directed his forces to be ready for war by 2027. And I know that we need to be more ready.
And not only that, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell just declared that the threat from the Chinese Communist Party is even greater than the threats of the Cold War. So how is the U.S. responding? Well, part of that response now, again, because what was the Cold War defined by? Nuclear threats, one of the big ones, the other one being subversion. But on the nuclear threat stage, what do? Well, you put missile defense systems in place. Part of the U.S. response to this new assessment is establishing new missile defense systems in the Asia-Pacific region. And a focal point of this has been in the Philippines. U.S. News said this. They said the United States has no immediate plan to withdraw a mid-range missile system deployed in the Philippines despite Chinese demands, and is testing the feasibility of its use in a regional conflict, sources with knowledge of the matter said. It notes that this system, it's the Typhoon system, which can be equipped with cruise missiles capable of striking Chinese targets, was brought in for joint exercises earlier this year. Both countries, the U.S. and the Philippines, said at the time, but has remained there, right? We're just bringing it in for training, but I think we'll leave it here in the meantime. And look, this is important because they're keeping the missile system there despite the Chinese Communist Party threatening and pressuring the Philippines to do otherwise. And that sends an interesting message to other countries in that region. One of the main tools the CCP uses to control other countries within that region is fear. They try to say, well, it would take the United States a long time to respond were a war to take place. They might not get here in time. It would be a shame if something happened to you. And so they align with the Chinese Communist Party rather than the United States. And the CCP typically doesn't accept both. They will not, again, just tolerate these countries aligning fully with the U.S. without pushing back on it. That region is defined by these conflicts. And so this new competition, notably, is giving a message to other countries, Vietnam, Japan, even South Korea, Taiwan, and others, that the United States has a presence there, that the United States is willing to stay there, that the threats from the CCP can and will be ignored, and that if you do that, even the Philippines can stand against the CCP. Now, Newsweek said this, a U.S. mid-range missile launcher deployed to the Philippines early this year for war games, it says, will remain in the country indefinitely, as long as possible. No seen end to it, the Southeast Asian nation said, despite protests from China. It notes that Brigadier General Bernard Harrington, commander of the U.S. military's first multi-domain task force, called the deployment, again, of that missile system, a, quote, significant step in the U.S.-Philippine partnership. And it's that local media cited Colonel Ronaldo Bellido, Jr., Deputy Chief of the Philippine Army Chief Public Affairs, who told the press Tuesday the system is being used for training and will remain until Washington and Manila decide to remove it, despite, again, all that pressure from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, interestingly as well, this shows kind of a shift in policy for the Philippines. It was looking a bit like the Chinese Communist Party was trying to cool tensions, quote unquote, because remember the Philippines is having a lot of maritime disputes with the CCP. They cooled tensions briefly. They came to the table, found an agreement, and they were going to just kind of tolerate each other's presence. The CCP violated that, at least in the assessment of the Philippines, very quickly, because the Philippines said, hey, we weren't fully told the terms of this agreement. What happened? In the Chinese Communist Party's eyes, was a battle of narrative. If the Philippines went to go resupply one of their ships, again on one of the shoals there, they were basically having to ask permission from the CCP to do it. On their side, it looked like saying, hey, we're going to be going here, we're just telling you. On the CCP's side, they said, we are allowing you to do it, suggesting that through this agreement, the Philippines was accepting CCP ownership of that region. And it was on that front the Philippines said, hey, you didn't really make the terms of this clear, deal's off. That deal very quickly unwound. They're right back to where they started. The conflict is ongoing, but rather than moving towards the CCP, the Philippines now is abandoning that, it seems, and moving towards the United States. Now, in other news, in addition to this, the CCP is also now targeting American defense companies with sanctions. It's notably going after companies that support Taiwan. I'll be talking more about this only on epictv.com. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, there's a link in the description below. Click on that. You'll get access to the rest of this episode, as well as our whole library of shows, our hard-hitting documentaries as well, on issues that really matter, like the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plan to defeat the United States. The CCP is one of the biggest threats to America. They're using things like propaganda, video games, entertainment, movies, culture, to subvert and influence the next generation. If you'd like to find out more what the CCP is plotting against America, watch my documentary, The Final War, the 100-year plot to defeat America. You can find the link to that in the description below, and I'll show you all the trailer before we go exclusively to epictv.com for the rest of this episode. I'll see you there.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.